Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I was looking in the chat and it seems that we have people from all over the world. So thank you so much for taking time out of your morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it may be, to join us for today's webinar. I am Madison Lundquist, and I am the Principal Research Lead for the Process and Performance Management area here at APQC. But I want to take a moment to introduce our speaker, Jennifer Breik. She is a certified change practitioner, executive coach, and has spent her 25-year career focused on designing and executing change. Jennifer leverages a hybrid approach to change management, having reviewed over 15 leading practice frameworks, including CMMI, APQC's 7 Tenets of Process Management, and Baldrige Excellence. Through the pandemic, with 100% remote staff, Jennifer was presented with a tough challenge that led to the tools and tactics she's going to share with you today. With that, I'd like to pass the presentation off to Jennifer.
Thanks, Madison. So as change leaders, we all have our own unique approach, but at a high level, it falls into generally these 4 phases, where you first get involved and you have to assess the current state and define the vision you want to achieve for the future state of that change. Then it comes to formulating a strategy and a plan around how to make that a reality. Then it's time to execute. And then finally, you reinforce the change through the embed and sustain. And I'm sure as change leaders, you can recognize several of the challenges on the screen. Things like when you start that change initiative, there never seems to be enough resources available to give time to your change effort. You may also run into where processes are living in people's heads versus being readily accessible. So these are some of the challenges that you have to figure out how to overcome as you begin your project. And change is coming at business faster and faster every year. Brought on by technological advancements like generative AI, which has blown up in the last 2 years, shifting market dynamics, and increasing regulatory pressure. But the approach we're taking today is working, right? Well, with statistics like these, where 70% of transformations fail to achieve those objectives, engagement levels are on a decline, and employees reporting that leadership is failing to effectively communicate that vision, it's time to challenge the status quo. So today we're going to cover 4 different areas of enhancements you can make to your existing process that will help not only solidify the foundation within your company, as well as bring about business resiliency and the ability to be agile with the changes that are coming forward. And they are the operational blueprint, 14 critical capabilities, exploring a next best action approach, and then upskilling. So let's walk through this with an illustrative example. Meet Kate. Kate's an executive leader in our organization and has recently gone through a merger and acquisition, as well as some internal restructuring, which has grown her team by about 2,000 employees. She now has to figure out how to integrate different systems, processes, and company cultures. In parallel, there have been some customer complaints that have highlighted some challenges within the existing processes, and they have risen to the level of senior leadership visibility. The team has been working nights and weekends to not only keep current operations going, but to also troubleshoot some of these customer complaints and problems. So burnout and disengagement is a challenge that's being faced. You know, as a change leader, the first thing you have to figure out is the current state. So things like who performs the roles, what departments get involved, what are the different functions and capabilities and risk exposure, what's the process look like, are all questions that you need to get answered in order to really begin planning your change initiative. We think about this as the operational blueprint. So if that information's readily available, you can really hit the ground running by taking that information and leveraging it to immediately move into that design workshops and future state envisioning. But when it's not readily available, you're faced with pulling together multi-day planning meetings where people have to share what's in their head around current state so you can begin to formulate the game plan, or the alternative of spending weeks in current state discovery sessions to document that current state. But what if there was another way? So let me introduce focus groups. So a focus group is a way to quickly, in about a 1 hour or so meeting, meet with the small sets of leaders and really find out challenges, opportunities, what's keeping them up at night. In a focus group session, you generally want to have 5 to 7 individuals in that meeting. Anything lower than 5, and you tend to not get as rich of a discussion during the meeting. Anything more than 7, and you tend to get people that aren't participating because there's too many voices in the room. But during that focus group meeting, you'll want to talk about people, process, technology, and performance management. And you're looking to really explore what sort of challenges in the current state around those different areas. And you do this by bringing up some primary questions. So let's say we're sitting in this session and we're starting off with process. You would provide a definition around the process that that group is visiting. Maybe it's the accounts payable process. So you define at a high level what the steps are in accounts payable, just to make sure you all know what process you're talking about. Then you would introduce some primer questions, like thinking about the accounts payable process. How well is that documented? Is there training available? When you hire new people, how easy is it to onboard them? By serving up a very small subset of primer questions to the group, you then turn it over to them for discussion. Their discussion will help start to highlight examples of problems, pain points, or opportunities around that process, which you're taking notes on while the session is going. As that discussion starts to level off, meaning they've kind of said what they have to say, you then introduce a scoring mechanism of high, medium, and low, which they'll pick which statement they feel process is risk-wise to that accounts payable. And now that gives you information around how big of an exposure you have with accounts payable as you're planning your change initiative. You repeat this for each of the different focus groups within Kate's organization and also outside Kate's organization, looking at IT, the downstream department from Kate, and then the upstream department from Kate. As we do this, we identify 200 different gaps or opportunities that the leaders have felt across these 6 focus groups. Those gaps and opportunities will get summarized up into root cause themes, which in this case helped highlight that ownership, roles and responsibilities weren't quite as clear. Processes definitely needed to be more socialized and readily accessible. And there were some opportunities with reporting. Those 8 root cause themes, 3 of which I just gave a sampling of, help to point to where there's cracks in the foundation of your operational area. And definitely those cracks need to be solved. Otherwise, the change that you're designing is going to be built on top of a broken foundation and will lead to some of those statistics we saw earlier with the 70% change failure. So with this knowledge about Kate's area, the 200 gaps and opportunities, and the 8 root cause, you start to analyze those 200 gaps, and it's pretty clear that 5 of them are what's keeping the leaders up at night and are the pain point to the team. So knowing the 14 capabilities, which I'll show you the full set in a few slides, one of those 14 capabilities is problem management. And so you decide to recommend to Kate that we should stand up a problem management capability within her organization and offer to lead standing this up due to the resource constraint under Kate's organization, and that you'll use those 5 high-value gaps that seem to be causing most of the pain in the department right now. Meanwhile, you'll also do a split approach where you'll have majority of the team still following that typical path, which you see on the bottom of the screen, where they continue to discover current state, while about 2 people from your team will stand up problem management. So as they kick off problem management, they leverage the problem management framework, things like ITIL, as well as ChatGPT, to understand what are those critical elements that come into problem management. They learn that there needs to be an identification mechanism. And once things are identified, there needs to be a way to prioritize those issues. And then it comes down to root cause analysis of those issues, identifying a solution, implementing that solution, and then making sure that that solution truly solved that problem. So you use the 5 high-value targets from the focus group and begin to go about figuring out what that process looks like. At the end of 2 weeks, you've successfully solutioned all 5 of them, and 3 of them you've gotten implemented and are making sure that the implementation truly solves that problem. With that, those results, you've also freed up about 10% of the resources time. And so that gives some capacity for them to start to assist in the project. Meanwhile, as you go into the next sprint cycle focused on problem management, your parallel team that has been doing the current state discovery has identified 10 more opportunities that they thought would be right for the problem management function you're starting to stand up. Bob is one of the leaders that has been helping solution these problems, and he has really liked what he's seen with being able to solve these challenges. So he approaches you and asks if he can help lead this function as you look to transition it. So you meet with Kate and the other leaders, and they agree that Bob will be taking over the problem management capability in addition to his own responsibilities. And so you decide to go ahead and run the next 2-week session, starting to work on those 10 problems through that already put together problem management process of identify root cause, design the solution, implement the solution, and then measure to make sure that you've solved it. You run that 2-week session, and Bob's shadowing you. He's watching you go through the meetings, giving some suggestions on how to improve that process, but really job shadowing you to learn how to take over this function. At the end of 2 weeks, Bob feels very confident to take over. And so the next 2 weeks, he's now leading those problem management meetings, and you're still attending to be there to coach, but really Bob's starting to take over. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, Bob feels completely comfortable, has been through this process a few times now, both seeing it and leading it, that he feels comfortable to fully transition over this role and knows that you're just a phone call away if there's any questions. So now let's turn our sights over to that parallel team's effort, which was focused on that current state discovery. Just a quick reminder that parallel teams already identified 200 opportunities from that focus group. They also know that they're dealing with different systems, processes, and that change culture. So they're really faced with a decision around how much time gets invested in really understanding the current state, especially given that they know they're going to be focusing efforts on designing a future state. So one of the other tools the team can bring forward that's alternative to going and doing weeks and weeks of process mapping or pulling people into multi-day workshops is to leverage APQC's 7 tenets approach. So the 7 tenets approach, if you're not familiar with it, basically came out of APQC's work with several business transformation leaders who had led failed transformation. And they studied it kind of from a Monday morning quarterback perspective. Hey, if we had to do this all over again, what would we do different that might have led to a more positive outcome? And that's where 7 tenets was born. So 7 tenets basically starts with having strategic alignment around that focus in future state. And then it goes into governance, where you're really establishing and shoring up roles and responsibility. And then comes the process modeling. There's also a maturity model tool, which you can use from APQC. The number is in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide for article reference. But this article will give you a maturity model, which takes each of those 7 tenets and allows you to ask questions around and really see what foundational elements are in place for each of those 7 tenets. And so coming out of using this model, you'll be able to see, for example, strategic alignment and where they are in the maturity cycle. So if we go back to our example with Kate, she knew that she needed to get teams together, integrate those teams, but didn't really have a clear vision around what that end state might look like, what specific tools they might be running, what the team structure might look like, and that would then inform the processes that would be needed. So Kate would be on more this initiate side of the spectrum. And within the building blocks report, you would see a definition around the activities that should be put in place for an initiate level of maturity. So you basically focus on meeting the customer where they're at today, and then looking to try and get them up, either if they're at the very bottom of initiate, then maybe you want to get them solid in all the capabilities under initiate. And if they're at the top of initiate, maybe you want to pull in some of the capabilities from the develop. So in addition to the items that you'll see in that building blocks report, which will start to give you clues around some of those foundational elements that should be in place, I also like to layer in the Baldrige Excellence Framework, and then any sort of one-off frameworks that are specific to one of those 14 capabilities. So for instance, project management and change management each come with some leading practice capabilities from PMBOK and ProSci. So if you take and start to layer in those requirements, now you have a really robust system to go against and look at what's in place. And these are the 14 capabilities, which by taking APQC's process tenets model and layering in some of those other frameworks I mentioned, helps get you to those capabilities. So they're broken up into 4 buckets, which are strategic management, And so that's got things like strategy, customer experience, and talent management. Then there's compliance and assurance, which is really around the risk management activities and the things that every organization needs to do to be compliant. Then you have operational excellence. And so this is really around processes, managing your resources, problem management sits here, and then of course, quality and reporting. And then finally, you've got, when you're looking to execute a change, the different capabilities that you need there, which are project management, change management, and then having the information and knowledge about the current state is where the information and knowledge management sits. So let's go back to our example with Kate. If these capabilities had been in place in Kate's organization, then the things that we did with the focus group and leveraging that APQC maturity model tool, that would have likely already been done with that strategy capability. Because within the strategy capability, you have both internal scanning and external scanning as two of those capabilities under strategy. The internal scanning would be looking at the different capabilities that you have today, your processes, the risk exposure within those processes, how well systems are supporting, do you have the metrics needed, and constantly scanning that state and understanding where you've got opportunities, which then informs what you focus on for that next year. If we look at customer experience, had that capability been in place, then the example around the customers highlighting breakdowns in the process and the configuration, which ended up reaching senior leadership visibility, that would have been able to be proactively managed, because within customer experience capability, you have things like understanding the customer journey, where those touch points are, how well you're doing against those touch points. So you would have been able to proactively identify where you might need to shore up your customer experience and be able to work in that strategy planning around when you wanted to prioritize addressing those gaps ahead of needing a change project to accomplish those things. And then finally, process management, which is under operational excellence. That's really around knowing that process and managing it to identify, anticipate, and solve gaps, as well as improve operational efficiency. So when we first deployed and we were looking for the current state and learned that processes weren't readily available or easily accessible, and we were met with having to do discovery sessions, that wouldn't have been the case had that process management capability been in place. So now I know what you're thinking. Wow, 14 capabilities. I'm going to have to get new staff. My business is going to have to get new staff. We can't possibly do this. Well, the capabilities themselves are not new full-time jobs. These are additional activities that you'll want to weave into the existing staff. And by doing these additional capabilities, you're actually going to save and free up resource time. And so just understand this is not a net new add of staff. It's really about shoring up the business resiliency, getting these standardized processes in place, and moving the business from a reactive frame of reference to being able to be more proactive and anticipate and find these cracks in the operational foundation and fix them ahead of the change team. So when the change team deploys, they can truly hit the ground running and focusing on partnering for that change. So in order to find out how to upskill your team, you really should focus on these 4 areas. And I have a prompt in ChatGPT that I'll share with you that covers off on these 4 areas. But in general, you want to understand what is that core knowledge you need around that capability. So in other words, that 20% of knowledge that really gives you 80% of the benefits. And so the reason you want to focus on the core is, first, it's got the most payback. But second, if you remember our problem management example, where there wasn't a problem management function and they had been dealing with it in these SWAT teams, and then we came in and helped establish an initial ad hoc process. Well, you're not worried about building out like an IT fully robust system to handle problem management with proactive scanning and analysis. You're really focused on the basic building blocks of what is that high level process and how do I go about putting something in place that will work for now until you decide if you need to scale it up. So our problem management solution might have been done in Excel with filters or flags to say, hey, this problem's in that idea phase and nobody's picked it up and done any analysis yet. These set of problems are in that root cause analysis phase, and then using pivot tables to manage it. As you start to go up in maturity, meaning you're continuing to run that problem management, you're 3, 4, 5 months in, and you're seeing a lot more problems come through that front door, that's when you start to explore, hey, maybe taking that tool out of Excel into something more robust. And so knowing that you really only need to get something up and running and working to like a defined high level process, you should focus on aligning the knowledge you need to what's going to give you that initial benefit, so that 20%. You can also tease out questions to consider, and these might be questions that you ask of the leadership team and the business team and understand how they want to design that capability or what will work best within their area. You also want to leverage leading practices. So I mentioned for project management, how they've got that PMBOK framework and change management has ProSci. Being able to understand what sort of leading practices out there also represents a good source for you to reference as you're designing this new capability. And then finally, the common challenges or solutions, being able to see what sort of barriers others have experienced will help you better design your process, because you can anticipate those and figure out how you solution them versus finding out about them down the road. And then I wanted to add a little bit more about operational blueprint. Should you all not have something like this in place yet, there really are 3 elements to focus on. So first is really understanding those key stakeholders. So this would be the customers of your processing company, the shareholders, any sort of regulatory external bodies that may regulate or set rules around how your company needs to operate. And then finally, the employees who are part of operations and running those processes. By understanding each one of these 4 different perspectives and keeping these stakeholders at the forefront of any sort of change that you're doing, it will set you up for much greater success. In the middle, you see that top level. So think about this as being the value that all companies provide. So there is value that your company does to get a customer. This might be things around research and development, sales and marketing. That would all fall under the pre-customer bucket. So as you initiate a change, if you can align it to pre-customer, now you can start to build out those processes and get a better understanding of what that pre-customer looks like. The second level might be, okay, we've got the customer. Now, what are we doing that's servicing that customer? That's really going to be where the bulk of your customer experience, pain or pleasure is felt. So being able to identify activities, business capabilities, and processes that fall under that service bucket will help you in planning your change initiatives. And then finally, that third bucket is really the back office operations. So this would be the common elements that regardless of industry that we're part of, that all companies have. So think HR, IT, accounting, legal. Those would all be examples of back office capabilities. And then finally, you want to make sure that you have these core metrics in place. So being able to understand how much it costs to execute the operations today, the quality of that operation. So is there a lot of errors and rework? If you go out into a change initiative and you find that there's a lot of errors and rework, then perhaps you start with that problem management function, because the errors and rework are going to have a tendency to pull that team into a lot of those firefighting scenarios. And so being able to proactively see that quality is potentially an issue and quickly deploy that problem management function will help you free up resources to really support your change initiative. Another core metric is around risk exposure. So being able to understand what sort of risk exists in that area and whether or not there's an issue today will be very informative for designing your change as well, because you don't want to go in and design a change that is going to potentially open that area up to some elevated risk exposure. And then finally, the experience of all four of those stakeholders. When you're designing a change, you want to make sure you're really seeking the optimal outcome around what's best for customers, best for shareholders, regulatory, and employees. So by implementing those 4 different activities that we talked about, the operational blueprint, the 14 critical capabilities, working things at a next best action at a time, and then upskilling your team, it will help take you from a world where you've got disengaged employees, fragmented processes, and reactive problem solving, to where we've got an engaged workforce, streamlined operations, and proactive problem management. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. So we've had a couple questions come in. First, when you were just talking about the key stakeholders with the operational blueprint, you didn't have suppliers explicitly listed in that key stakeholders bucket. Was that intentional, or do you see them maybe fitting into one of those other groups you had on there?
I would kind of count them in the employees bucket, the people doing the action.
Okay, great. And then I had another question. What do you think are the most, I know you had a project that was 100% remote work, and today a lot of organizations have moved to the hybrid approach. So what would you consider the most critical capabilities for organizations to focus on when leading projects through a hybrid environment?
Definitely strategic alignment, because the more that you can understand the role that that team plays, where the team is going, and remember, under strategic alignment, it's got both the internal scanning, which is understanding your current processes, where you've maybe got gaps and opportunities, as well as the external scanning. So what competitors are doing, what sort of regulatory changes may be coming down the line, where's technology going. by being aligned as a remote team around those different elements, now everyone can kind of make a best informed action around how to execute their role in the organization. Second would really be governance and clarity around roles.
For sure. And I have a feeling the answer might be similar to the next question. But if an organization has low maturity across all or most of their capabilities, which ones do you think would be the most important to establish first, or does it depend?
So it would really depend on what you find in those focus groups. And those capabilities, those 14 capabilities are meant to be embedded in the area. So it's not like you go into a change initiative area and you've established strategy and Kate's organization and we're good. Because the other leaders around Kate may not have that strategy element in place. And so you really got to look at establishing those 14 within the area and then what's best for that area. So with Kate's scenario, we went with problem management first. And that's really because of the challenges with team disengagement, the resource capacity, and just burnout. And so the most important thing is change moves through people. And if the people are disengaged and burned out, you're not going to get very far in the change. So it doesn't matter if you've got the perfect strategy because you're getting blocked at the human aspect. And that's really where that next best action comes in, because every couple of weeks, the environment around you changes. You can have key leaders leave, new regulations can come down, new processes can happen, or system changes, or things can break. And so you want to have your pulse on kind of where your capabilities are today and figure out which one makes the most sense to invest your time in. So treat it almost like a ROI of your resource time.
Great answer. Now you've had a decently long career in the change management space, but I always like to ask how people got there. I know change management exists throughout the business, but it's not always they graduate from college and say, I'm going to lead change throughout organizations. So what drew you to the change management space? What do you like about it? Tell us a little bit about that.
I like to challenge the status quo and figure out a way to make things better. So even in my very first career, when I was working through college, I was always looking at, okay, how do I do this better so that it's more streamlined? And I just kept that as I was growing up in my career, ended up in consulting, where that just kind of like put gasoline on the fire, and the journey began from there. And so I'm not the person that comes in and likes to look at it and say, okay, it's the 22nd of the month, on the 22nd of the month we do this. I like a lot of change and unpredictableness.
I'm sure you ruffle some feathers from time to time with that statement. So another question came in here. What is the best way to use internal audit in the transformation process from your perspective?
So my early days were spent in internal audit, so I have a deep appreciation for that group. How I've tried to use them in the past is to have a collaborative partnership. So meeting with them at least monthly to understand where their audit focus is and what they're finding, as well as being able to share the transformation efforts that you're involved in and where you're seeing potential opportunities. I found that openness and collaborative approach to be really valuable, in that for your business stakeholders, well, audit is necessary. No one says, geez, I hope I get audited this week. And so for your internal stakeholders, by having you in there and engaged and already helping to work through that risk management, that tends to buy them some time in the audit or make the audit less painful. So they're usually on board with that. And then the auditors have really welcomed our team with open arms because they're able to get those processes, the risk exposure, game plans around how you're going to remediate it and when, which gives them a lot more assurance going in and auditing an area or deciding, hey, we don't need to audit this right now because we're comfortable with the game plan in place.
Great. Okay, one more question here. They are transitioning into a new managerial position within a municipal level. When would this critical step be looked into so they don't ruffle too many people with too much change?
So just any of the 4 steps that I've covered?
I think so.
Yeah, so I would definitely not recommend going in with all 4 and saying like we must do all these things overnight. What I would do is I would start small with one project. And so let's say we go back to the Kate example and these capabilities weren't in place. You might pick one of those capabilities, bring it forward as a, hey, I think this could be good to implement. I want to do a pilot around it. What sort of things would you need to see to consider this to be a success and want to look to invest more time in it? And so getting that early buy-in, doing it with more of a pilot approach and finding out how you can show something as success and getting those early wins starts to help build confidence in you as that trusted change advisor and will help you open up other doors. So kind of choose your battles, but choose them around which ones you think can be really impressive in a pilot approach.
Makes sense. Not too much change at once, for sure. Those are all the questions we've gotten today. I hope everybody was able to connect with Jennifer on LinkedIn and get that upskills prompt. I'm going to go ahead and close this out for the webinar for today. Before I do, Jennifer, do you have any closing thoughts or any last comments?
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing all of your great insights. So with that, I will give a couple of reminders. We will be sending out the slides and recording within a couple of days, so watch your email for that. Please don't forget to take our webinar satisfaction survey that'll pop up whenever the webinar closes. Visit our events page for upcoming webinars and more. And if you missed any past webinars, feel free to visit our on-demand webinar page to see those. And I've also included a few links here on the next slide of some resources related to the different topics that Jennifer talked about today that you can find in the resource library. That 7 tenets of process management maturity model that Jennifer talked about, as well as the process maturity model. And then we have a whole collection around change management as well. So be sure to check that out. Don't forget to connect with us on our social media sites to stay up to date on everything that is going on here at APQC. And with that, I will end the webinar and thank everyone for joining today.
Thank you.